As General Motors goes, so goes the nation. It's what used to be said about American manufacturing. Well, some people are saying the current Obama plan is trying to breathe life into a dying corpse. If so, what does it mean for the future of American manufacturing? And is there a way to breathe new life into a whole new vision for American auto and American manufacturing?
President Obama said he'll not see the U.S. auto industry go down on his watch. But he laid out his government's tough response to the recent proposals from General Motors and Chrysler, who are applying for further government loans to keep them out of imminent bankruptcy.
Each company has submitted a plan to restructure. But after careful analysis, we've determined that neither goes far enough to warrant the substantial new investments that these companies are requesting. And so today I'm announcing that my administration will offer GM and Chrysler a limited additional period of time to work with creditors, unions, and other stakeholders to fundamentally restructure in a way that would justify an investment of additional taxpayer dollars.
The White House rejection makes equal targets of both the workers and management, suggesting that workers must concede on more of their benefits, while chastising management for unrealistic business forecasts and a lack of vision for a competitive product. This brought about what amounts to a firing by the White House of General Motors CEO Rick Wagoner, immediately replaced by his handpicked successor, Chief Financial Officer Fritz Henderson. Despite this, the U.S. media has identified the workers as the central obstacle to competitiveness. Take the line of questioning from NBC's David Gregory during his Sunday morning interview with GM's new CEO, who's asking for $16 billion in government loans to add to the $13 billion received in December.
Well, let's talk about how you can do more. How many union jobs are there in a typical factory for General Motors that have nothing to do with producing an automobile?
Well, actually every job we have in a factory has something to do with producing an automobile.
In some factories, you have a shop steward who's responsible for appointing, whether it's a civil rights chief or an education person. These are all union jobs that don't have anything to do with producing the car. You have told healthcare managers and executives over 65 that they no longer get health care benefits. They have to revert at that point to Medicare. Is it time for union workers to accept that same limit?
David, the provision of health care to our hourly employees will basically vest to the responsibility of a VEBA trust effective January 1st, 2010. The VEBA trust will be responsible for determining the level of benefits, and I can't really forecast, if you will, what decisions they're going to make.
But do you think that's the kind of cut that the union should have to accept?
Not for me to say, David.
Do you really expect this president, given how strongly supported he is by the unions, do you really expect him to take a step that would hurt the unions? What is the message to the union now? Doesn't it have to be those days are over?
To tell us what they think of President Obama's plans, we're now joined by Tiffany Tenike, who writes for Labor Notes, based in Detroit, and Frank Hammer, who used to be president of a transmission local for General Motors in Detroit. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Good evening.
So Tiffany, what is your take on Obama's plan? And what do you make of the argument that people watching this are going to say auto workers have had it relatively good in terms of being, especially when compared to unorganized workers. So why shouldn't auto workers make these kinds of concessions if that's what it takes for these places to survive?
There's a real myth right now that auto workers make a tremendous amount of money, that there's a greedy auto worker. We've been hearing in the media that auto workers make something like $70 an hour, and these statistics are completely inflated.
So what's the facts?
Right now, an entry-level auto worker, because of concessions, comes in and makes $14 an hour. You have auto workers who might be making $50,000 a year who right now are being told by the general public and by the media that they're greedy for making a middle-class wage.
The 10% of the car, of the expense of a car, is what's attributed to labor cost at the max. So the idea that auto workers are the cause of the company's problems, I think, has been one of the most major forms of misinformation that has gone out to the public, that it somehow seems that auto workers are too expensive. On the contrary, it's by virtue of the fact that we've made the wages of an auto worker at $28 an hour that it has enabled us to buy the vehicles that we make. The auto worker that works at the Mexican GM plant cannot afford to buy their car.
Now, they're saying that the auto industry in Detroit has to be competitive with the auto industry in the southern United States, or non-unionized plants. Okay. So what is the case?
Well, one of the things that makes the GM less competitive than Toyota is that Toyota are relatively new plants. Toyota, Nissan, Mercedes are all within the last 10, 15 years. They have no retirees to speak of. So they don't have the so-called legacy costs. Whereas General Motors is a company that's been around 100 years, of course it has costs. Toyota and all the other companies don't have those problems as of yet, but they will in a matter of time.
One of the big pieces of his proposal is somehow he wants the auto industry to get rid of what they're calling the legacy debt.
The legacy costs that they're talking about is primarily the health care of retirees, which has become extremely excessive by virtue of the fact that the companies have been buying out all these workers and putting them into retirement, whereby they can get younger workers at a lower wage, so that the exiting workers were making approximately $28 an hour, and the new workers that are going to be coming in are going to be paid half that. They're going to be paid $14 an hour. Well, to expedite that process, they've swelled the ranks of retirees to the point that it is genuinely a burden on the company. And there was a solution that the UAW and GM had agreed to starting in 2005, reaffirmed in 2007, that both parties, both the company and the union, would seek to have have health insurance on a national scale, lifting the burden off the companies and generalizing it to the society as a whole to include non-insured, and that way relieve General Motors of the burdens that other companies, for example Toyota or whether it be Volkswagen, they have national health insurance in those countries. They could compete on a more level plane. But what happened is that even though they agreed to do that, they walked away from that agreement. Both parties walked away from that agreement and instead agreed to shift the burden from General Motors onto the UAW in the form of this independent trust. And even though the President Gelfinger promised that when they did this, that it would be good for 80 years, here we are 18 months later, and the thing is in the trash can, and it's not guaranteed for, nobody's making any effort to make a guarantee of how long this will serve the retirees and their health care needs.
That what we did in 05 and 07, we reduced the company's liability by 50% when we put those VIBAs in place then. So now to take that and reduce it even further by accepting stock, which is passing risk on to us, was a major move on our part, and we believe it was the right thing to do.
The so-called Voluntary Employees Beneficiary Association, or VEBA plan, saw the union take on retiree health care benefits in return for $40 billion cash from the companies. In February, the UAW agreed to accept 50% of Ford's debt to them in the form of company stock. This promise of health care for retirees, then, is that under threat, you think, in these Obama proposals?
Absolutely. The funding of it is being threatened. Because if half the retiree health care costs are going to be based on how well the stock is doing for General Motors or for Ford or for Chrysler, well, that's just gambling on health care. That's what that's doing. And
particularly when we talk about bankruptcy, bankruptcy is constantly on the table in this debate, and bankruptcy is the quickest way for a company to get rid of all of its obligations to workers, which would mean an already underfunded plan covering health care would be essentially gone at that point.
And bankruptcy is on the table, as was confirmed by GM's new CEO on Meet the Press on Sunday.
Well, the administration basically said the same thing. It may very well be the best alternative. As I look at the situation, we need to accomplish a set of goals, and accomplishing those can't be compromised. So if it can't be done outside of a bankruptcy process, it will be done within it.
So what's at the root of the problem?
They have not made enough changes to anticipate the new economy and to anticipate the changes in energy use, and so they're sort of been lagging behind. While Toyota was marketing a Prius, General Motors was still insisting on trying to make money off of Hummers.
Now, people say the unions went along with all this. There was very little from the unions opposing these kinds of strategies.
In my experience, the UAW has been unfortunately playing the role of enabler in an attempt to defend auto workers and their livelihoods. So I think the UAW resisted looking at things in terms of new energy and converting the auto companies into more green direction for fear that this would be a calamity. Well, the calamity is what we're facing now.
At a time when the Obama administration is spending billions of dollars to create jobs, current auto industry restructuring plans will lay off thousands more workers. At a time when President Obama is calling for a bold vision of a new green economy, many auto workers say these restructuring plans will destroy much of the capacity to manufacture a new green North American transportation system. We'll explore that question in the next segment of Motown Blues or Detroit Green.